Değerli dostlar merhaba.
Hello.
İtibar Derneği'nin yeni bir
We are back again at another summit of the Ethics and Reputation Society, the 8th International Ethics Summit. As you all know, New Thresholds, New Horizons, the theme of this summit. We have a threshold that is brought by the pandemics, and now we'd like to have a total bright, more humanistic, more sharing horizon that we're looking at. Are we doing so? If not, what we should do? At this part of the interview, we're together with SALİMKADIBEŞEGİL. There's no need to actually introduce him, but he's a mentor to me, I should say. Maybe I can say the actual definition of literacy in the 21st century. Whenever, for example, I read something and I said, Salim, I've just read this book, and said, I've already read the book. And whenever I just try to write down something, Salim is telling me that I've already written that. So his intellectual capacity is not something to be brought down back to literacy only. I can say that actually Salim defined a new term of literacy in the 21st century. So welcome, Salim. Thank you very much, Tayfun. I have no idea what to say after this introduction. Maybe you should actually lean back and try to enjoy the interview. Actually, I'm just talking about the facts. I can actually see two of your books at your back, and over 40 years of an experience, and you actually an intellectual that wrote 10 books already, and therefore I think it's very important to introduce you to our guests. Thank you very much. Thank you. So, today, let's start a journey with you. World Economic Forum, as you all know, for almost 2 years saying that now we are actually at the eve of a new reset, and we actually have to redefine capitalism, and especially at the eve of, especially there's need for this paradigm shift, and pandemics is actually an opportunity that we should use. Of course, it is not actually fully defined, this reset, as a term, but I think it's an important term. As you all know, if all the bosses of the world are coming together and speaking of the same thing, it means that we should at least try to understand what this reset is. Of course, I can say they're speaking out an entire reset at the community level, but as you all know, in the business world, whenever we say a reset, it starts with the companies and those who are managing those companies. I think 25 years ago, mission and vision started to be used, and especially the Turkish companies started to copy and paste the handsome missions all around the world, I can say, but it was an important threshold, because if companies actually, once they have a mission and they have an identity, it is a good thing. But what is important is actually to have a business model that is compliant with that mission and vision. And if they can actually, then they can be actually a world citizen and a corporate world citizen. We have successes and failures, but of course we'll be speaking about success stories today. And while I was getting prepared for this discussion, I actually come up with Brand Service, for example, meaningful company. And as much as I know you have just met those terms before me, I have no doubt about this, but maybe you can help me a little bit to understand those terms. And the world is looking for something new. In Rio UN conference in 1982 it started, Sustainable Human Development, and that was the time. But of course it started long ago. I'm looking for the searching for something new, but at Rio conference actually seeds sown, and I think we actually have the reflections of that Rio conference today. For example, the imperfect at that time, and I'm just learning those things from actually my daughter, by the way, about how to fill in these terms. Maybe I should have also said Fahri Nisa Kadıbeşegil, son, the son of an intellectual, the father of another intellectual, and also the grandfather of an intellectual, I can say. I don't know, maybe 30 years later, when we're just speaking about sustainability, will be your grandson or granddaughter will be speaking about meaningful company, about purposefulness. I just wrote an article and I would like to actually make a reference to my daughter. Maybe I will make it much more personalized now. But the core motive and this grand purpose that was being discussed for the last 8 to 10 years now. And Ruth is saying that is the most difficult question. What is the reason of your existence? I mean, your company, for example, your company is not established only for making profit. They actually found a problem, and solving a problem is also a part of this existence. For example, your employees, why they're coming to work every day, so as to identify a problem. And at the same time, all the employees, what competencies do they have so as to find a solution to that problem? You actually have to reveal it and then let it shine. It is not only profitability. I mean, if you only have profit at the core, it will make your company look weak, and it also would mean that you actually have no ambition. It's an important finding. Why? Because where we actually have to bring this. In August 2019, the Business Roundtable, which started in 1970s, I can say, the CEOs of the biggest corporations worldwide, that is a lobby, and it's a declaration by them. And in that declaration, they said, we, about for the raison d'etre of the corporates, we're changing it. For over 100 years, a matter that's been the backbone of the capitalism turned upside down. And then they said, what we, for example, define as the shareholders, the raison d'etre of the companies, now it will be replaced by creating value for the stakeholders, shareholders. I mean, it could be raising the satisfaction or living standards of the employees, and at the same time, it could be, for example, paying attention and being respectful for the environment, for the ecological environment, having some performance areas sensitive for this, and to actually have more ethical and more fair contracts with your suppliers. So we think about the chain of things in here. I don't know, of course, to what extent they are sincere or not, but time will show. But I think about the raison d'etre of the companies, I can say there is actually a change, and at the same time a need as well. For example, stakeholder capitalism. That's something I think beyond the dimensions of this. Even I can say it is beyond the social capitalism, and we're just living in a world going through that direction. At the same time, meaningful company. I mean, creating social benefit or interest. We already have it somewhere, and one of the recent examples I can say, just to open up the topic, 1 month ago, one of the biggest companies in the world, Unilever, sent a memorandum to the suppliers and said, until 2030, and you also will be accountable for the living standards of your employees. So they at the same time should have a living standard, a humanistic living standard. And if you actually have a role in making this possible, you also should assume the responsibilities that you have. I will also check for this. So Unilever is one of the biggest corporations in the world, and signing such a memorandum, and if you just look at the back, you actually have to go back to 1989. What happened there? At one moment, Dan & Jerry, a company founded by them at that time, they were not only producing ice cream, but also they were dealing with the poverty in Africa, dealing with the global warming, environmental issues, dealing with the human rights issues. How they were doing it? They were generating reports, publishing them on their web page. I mean, they acted as an activist, and they created a raison d'etre at that time for this. And And in 1989, one of the sustainability reports published by Dananceli at that time. And no one at that time discussed about sustainability or corporate responsibility or social reporting. That was not the case at that time, but they actually had their suppliers audit their companies and hiring some external auditors. And the second breaking point, I mean, back to the memorandum by Unilever, in 1999, United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan published the Declaration about Sustainable Human Development, and so as to attract the companies abiding by this. And 36 CEO undersigned that declaration, and Unilever was not there, but P&G, the number one competitor, was there. And P&G, in parallel to undersigning this convention, started a major transformation at the beginning of the year 2000. Then 2002, this time, the executives of Unilever, but of course it is actually my interpretation of the event, but there was actually a big gap with the biggest competitor, and the gap is getting more and more. It's not something to do with the market or being product focused and so on. And they found out that as social interest is very important, and one of the performance area that is creating social interest is the reason why there is a gap between them. And if you just start learning it from scratch, it will take decades. But in 2002, they actually acquired Ben Jerry. It looked like quite an ordinary merger and acquisition, but the reason is that we have no idea about how to do it. You should teach us how to do this, about the sustainability issue, about having being a social and a meaningful company, which policies we should make. So we're just buying you so you can teach us. And until 2008, they just worked as a like a lab, and Unilever used them. And in 2008, a CEO, Pullman, appointed, and a very important leader, and at the same time previously from P&G, and for a decade at Unilever, for Ben & Jerry's, and what they inspired, they deployed that culture to Unilever, and they changed the entire culture. So a month ago, to their suppliers, they sent a memorandum. That is actually the history when we look retrospectively how it happens. I think, again, at the backstage of capitalism, in 1930s, we also observed similar things about meeting requirements to the marketing of the desires. And where they performed the actual marketing, they aimed at the mind of the consumer. About products, not products and services. Mainly, for example, called new consumer. And especially something that could be very meaningful for capitalism, and especially that marketing, I mean, in the minds, it brought us where about creating a new consumer, a consumption economy that we cannot handle, that end up with environmental pollution, then global warming, and at the same time, it actually has brought us to so many changes. That's the reason why some of the corporations started to judge themselves. So turn to the meaningful company that is creating a social interest, transformed into that. This, in this century, I think the speed will be faster, and I think the number of the companies acting as such will increase. By maybe changing the raison d'etre of the companies, it will start. For example, maybe the members of the non-governmental organizations are started to be appointed to the board of directors or to the executive committee. The metrics of the members are changing. For example, they get bonuses on the financial tables, but now employee satisfaction and environmental issues at the same time are started to be considered for the performance assessment. It's okay, maybe you help us make good money for us to the shareholders and so on, but at what cost? For example, about your plastic or the carbon footprint, what you have done, your social interaction with the environment. These are the things they started to assess. So the situation with the suppliers, for example. And last year, for example, some of the things implemented, for example, in human rights, about the refugees. Now we are just speaking about the brands that are taking action against us. For example, the pancake syrup producer changed even the name and the label. I mean, it even led to some of the radical changes. Why it happened? Because the economy is changing. I mean, I'm not asking you to produce ordinary these products. It is at which point you are about your sensitivity towards these issues. For example, they told us the brains should never involve in politics. That's what we studied. But now the brains are right in the middle of the politics and they're taking an active role. It could be about discrimination. For example, people were on the streets, especially about the African Americans, the Black Lives Matter. And Nike did what? For example, racism in the American Football League had protests and had the athlete as the face in his advertisement. So someone banned from the field for lifelong. And therefore, especially in social issues, $500 million at the same time of a fund. Or after Nike, and then Sarah Evan Williams at the same time started to be used. And I think it shows that something has started to change. And at the beginning of the year 2000, we started to hear, especially for the companies creating a social interest. And again, in the companies that we have, the benefit corporations, again, with people, 3 or 5 people, and more than 3,500, again, B+, again, benefit corporations that we have. What do you mean by benefit corporations? They do the job, but in ethical standards, and by considering the social and the environmental issues, they do business. I mean, they manage life by considering all these issues. And these are maybe considered as the small and medium corporations. No, not. Danone, for example, applied for this, an important international brand, said, and I would like to be a part of these benefit corporations. How they are going to do it? By actually, they have to complete a certification process, and they set 2025 as the target, and all the processes and all the strategies are designed accordingly. Now, my personal opinion is that, especially in those that are having a social benefit, I think the companies will turn to industries that create a social benefit. What do I mean by this? I think last May I wrote an article in energy, water, food, seed, pharma, in these industries. they also will evolve. And especially some international corporations at the same time will do that. So it actually, especially energy, water, pharma, these industries. It is not only money, but especially creating a social benefit for the planet. So at the same time by the international society, I mean, will be managed by the international society. So and steps will be taken as such. Of course, you're not saying that there will be actually some, the reasons will be, some reasons will also be created for more, but after 100 years, maybe there actually will no more be some of the companies. And I said this based on what the same molecule, for example, so as to develop a drug, tens of companies and thousands of people at different parts of the world will spend billions of dollars and they perform a study, and there's only one drug that comes up at the end. However, if there is actually a superstructure that is managing this, then the very same drug with the very same people will be developed at once. They will produce it at once, and at the same time they will make it accessible to those who are in need of these drugs, and therefore the resources of the planet will be optimally used. And as a result of this, people actually will get what they need, and people who are in need of treatment at the same time will have access to these drugs. For the COVID vaccine, for example, we actually had a challenge on this. For this vaccine, for example, so as to produce it, tens and thousands of labs worked for this, and billions of dollars spent for this. What I mean is that rather than doing this, all these resources, if they were managed collectively, I'm sure that the vaccine will be developed earlier and would be more efficacious, but at the same time, it will be a vaccine that is accessible by the entire world. And so it will actually be a health benefit for everyone. Now, what I'm trying to say in here is that, of course, my ideal is that, for example, for the world to turn into a Wikipedia society eventually. As you all know, in Wikipedia, there is actually a system. Everyone gives, everyone takes, and there's no actual money at the backstage, I can say. So it's all about our chain or a collection of values, and maybe at the same time will turn to a Wikipedia society. Of course, there's no sign of capitalism that, or an era that there's no sign of capitalism that we'll be speaking about. So there will be a new governance model, but the most radical transformation, I guess, would be in the order of priorities. Together with capitalism, I guess money, human, and if time allows, environment, planet. That actually was the order. But in this model, first planet, then maybe nature, I mean the raw material and resources mainly, then human, then if needed, money. That will be the list of priorities. I mean, so that's how it would look, I guess. Thank you. As for the disasters that would happen to a company that will actually not meet the requirements of the stakeholders, if by experience and by our imagination we actually can define them, but it is not about not meeting the demands of the stakeholders, but it is mostly about ensuring the prosperity and well-being of the stakeholders. That makes sense. And I was about to ask wonderful question. Focusing on the stakeholders' well-being and making money, and you said one of the top companies in the world, and I'm sure that there are so many good best practices. Starbucks that I remember, especially fair commerce. You mentioned about Unilever, and we've actually opened up the horizon for this, but back to the industries that are working as the denominator of the humanities. Some of the, I think, interests are in conflict. The pandemics brought us there, but I'm not sure if the business world is ready to get the message that is conveyed by the pandemic. It's okay, on 3 molecules, several different companies are investigating it for years and spending so much money. And therefore not working so efficiently, I can say. And at the same time, the cost is actually borne by the people. It is such a price. We're speaking about such a pharma industry right now, but you stated that it is not with the today's model, but in an ideal model. For example, World Health Organization will actually be the umbrella. I don't know, maybe it is something that is even managed by the artificial intelligence, especially from the R&D side. In such a world, maybe this not so meaningful competition between the companies and this non-productivity will be wiped out of the surface of the world. Maybe we're looking for such a future. With the inspiration from the vaccine back to today, at one side, there are countries like us that would look like to be a part of this, but also the European Union that is actually around a collective high ideals, how the vaccine will be shared within the EU, even among their own members, not about the sharing of the vaccine all around the world. Therefore, the priorities are forgotten totally, in particular. Especially those that are equipped with high principles had a challenge, and as a result of this challenge they actually put aside some of the countries, and for a certain, it's actually a process of life and death issue, but they actually have changed their attitude. So what do you say about this? Especially, do you think the world is ready for such a transformation? Maybe the world is ready, but how about the administrators for this? There are several examples, and it is also possible to look at small cases and learn big things. I think it's very important to look at some of the cooperatives. For example, at Urla, there is Bademler village, and since the 30s, they actually have a theater, and the villagers are making the stage and directing the play and so on, and they are the actors, actresses, but they at the same time produce, they sell their products, and over those values they produce. Or there is Gönence Cooperative, another one, and different cooperatives, and these are so nice small examples. For example, Uygar at the same time is the leader, Good for Trust, for example. So this is the new world. I think can draw big lessons. They've been there for decades, and somehow it happens. There is a good idea, but how you can well decorate that, and how you can make it a democratic participation, and how life can be maintained. So to make these things more clear, quite an irrelevant example, Robert Redford, for example, Sundance Vision. In 1980s, the Independent Film Center in the middle of, for example, a small village that, and now, as you all know, the it is the film industry center right now, and they serve the same purpose. And the people who serve the same purpose come together. They produce the same thing here with the same goal, and it actually turned into a social participatory model. Maybe you can adopt it to potato production, to vehicle manufacturing, or to the urbanization models. It doesn't matter. So what is important is the idea there, and at the same time how we can come together around that idea, and how we can build up on this. About the values of the European Union, whether it is the values are good or not. It is also about the vaccine, and as you all know, it was a big challenge for the European Union, because all these issue of the values, like world citizenship, being global citizens, and so on, these are the things that either converge or diverge us. Or, for example, the grand purpose, and at the same time turning into the benefit corporation or Wikipedia, and or the business model. So these are the steps telling us that a new world order is coming. What is important right now is to maybe quantify them and to make them more in number. So the main pillars of the participatory democracy is always there, are always there.
And looking into ethical trade dimension, early in 2000s, it was barely $1 billion worth of a global trade volume, and last year it was almost $6 billion US. So what does it mean? As consumers, we are changing our mentalities. We're just evolving in our mentalities. So we want to switch over to somewhere else, which is not far away. Even the biggest companies of the world are sitting and just thinking about the fact that this trend may be permanent, so they're trying to focus themselves onto it. Mr. Kadıbeşegil, thank you very much. As always, it's been a really wonderful dialogue with you. Hope it was the same for distinguished participants. You've covered the stakeholder demands and finished with human resources, and of course we've talked about the joint efforts of humanity in some sectors, particularly pharma, energy, how the needs will be designed for the future. Hopefully we will be governed in line with these ideals. Hopefully the companies will take their position in that formulation, because the people are just switching gears in big companies, and the world is changing. Therefore, the people who are making these laws and these designs, and of course undoubtedly us as the big companies, as the customers, we do have a place in it, which reminds me the scandal. What are the emission values of this car? I mean, should be the question that is asked by the customers rather than how fast it can go. And only then we will get to the point of growing ourselves and maybe the industries for the sake of humanity, of course. And only then we'll be experiencing capitalism only for the sake of humanity. We do hope so, and of course in our mindset, in our ideologies, but we'll see, we'll wait and see, because it just boils down to the decisions of humanity. In closing, any final remarks? Meaningful company, meaningful industry, and meaningful life. Thank you very much for your kind invitation. It was an honor, sir. Thank you. It was really wonderful coverage, and hope to see you again.